He walked his dog like he did every evening. Calm, focused, harmless. But what happened next changed everything. A 45-year-old Navy veteran, a rescue dog named Atlas, and 2 cops who thought no one would fight back. This isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. Watch how truth, loss, and justice collide. Don't scroll. Hit subscribe, like the video, and share it now. You won't believe how this ends. He had walked this path 100 times before. Same shoes, same pace, same dog. The quiet stretch of Sycamore Lane wrapped around the neighborhood like a gentle loop. A perfect 1.5 miles of clean sidewalks, low fences, trimmed hedges, and the occasional breeze that rustled the oak leaves just enough to make the air feel alive. At 5:45 every evening, right after the sun dipped low enough to scatter gold across the rooftops, Samuel Redding stepped outside with his rescue dog, Atlas. It was a ritual, a grounding, a moment to exhale without feeling watched. Samuel was 45, tall, broad, and moved with a quiet certainty, like a man who had learned the hard way to trust his instincts. 22 years in Navy intelligence had shaped everything about him. The way he walked, the way he scanned the horizon without seeming to look, the way he breathed slow and steady, like time was never something to fear. He didn't speak much about what he'd seen. War zones, classified operations, hostile lands where even silence could be deadly. What mattered now was peace. And peace, he believed, was earned. Atlas padded along beside him, a 100-pound shepherd with golden fur, steady eyes, and the kind of discipline most people only dreamed of. Rescued at 2 years old from a failed K-9 unit, Atlas had taken to Samuel like they were made for each other. There was no need for words between them. A glance, a sound, a shift in posture. They understood. They moved in sync. Neighbors often smiled as they passed, calling out greetings or waving from porches. Samuel would nod, sometimes smile. Nothing more. Stillness was his language now. That evening, the air was perfect. 68 degrees. A soft breeze carried the scent of cut grass and barbecue. Children laughed in backyards. Somewhere, a lawnmower hummed. The world felt intact. Samuel loosened his shoulders and took a deeper breath. He was home. After years overseas, home had become this. The rhythm of Atlas's paws on pavement, the weight of the leash in his left hand, the creak of the same old mailbox on the corner. Predictable. Safe. Until it wasn't. He felt it before he saw it. A slow shadow creeping in where light had settled. It started as a hum in the air. A vehicle. Engine idling just a bit too low. Tires crunching against the curb at a speed too careful. Samuel didn't look back immediately. He didn't have to. He'd been followed before. In cities where the wrong glance meant a knife in the back. In deserts where the silence could kill you. In meetings where truth was a weapon and everyone smiled too wide. But this was different. This was home. When he finally turned his head, slow and deliberate, he saw it. A black and white patrol car, windows down, rolling half a block behind him, watching, crawling like a predator unsure of its prey. No lights, no siren, just presence, invasive, intentional. Samuel's spine stiffened. Not visibly, not dramatically, just enough to center his balance. His grip on the leash didn't tighten. His pace didn't falter. He kept walking. Atlas, alert but composed, turned his head just slightly, sensing the change in energy. His ears perked. His breathing shifted. The car inched closer. Samuel felt the moment fracture. That quiet confidence he carried, that deep-rooted peace, began to tremble beneath the surface. Not from fear. He had faced worse. It was the insult of it, the absurdity, the bitter ache of recognition. He had bled for this country, delivered intelligence that stopped attacks, saved lives no one would ever know were at risk. And yet here he was, watched, hunted, on a sidewalk in his own neighborhood, like a stranger trespassing on a life he had paid for in full. He didn't reach for his phone, he didn't record, not yet. He didn't want to believe it was happening, but he knew it was. The patrol car pulled alongside him, window sliding down with that mechanical hiss that always seemed louder than it should be. 2 officers sat inside. One older, pale-skinned, bald under his cap, Kyle Brenner, though Samuel didn't know his name yet. The other was younger, dark buzz-cut, restless hands tapping the wheel. Dean Sutter. Their eyes said everything before their mouths even opened. Brenner leaned out slightly. "Evening! Beautiful dog." Samuel nodded. "He is." "You live around here?" Sutter asked, too casually. "I do," Samuel replied. "Can we see some ID?" Brenner added, voice still coated in the sticky sweetness of faux politeness. Samuel stopped walking. He turned fully toward them, still holding Atlas's leash. "Is there a reason for the stop?" Brenner's smile didn't change. "You look out of place. We've had a few complaints about someone matching your description." "Walking a dog?" "Loitering," Sutter added. Samuel exhaled through his nose. Measured. Controlled. Atlas stepped a half-inch closer to his leg, his ears twitching. "I live 4 blocks down. If you follow me, you'll see the house with the red shutters and the flag on the porch. I hung it myself." Brenner's eyes lingered. Sutter shifted in his seat. The silence grew thick. "Gonna need to see that ID anyway," Sutter said. Samuel nodded once. No sudden moves. He reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out his wallet, holding it open in one hand, the leash still firm in the other. Atlas stayed still, watching, breathing. Brenner leaned out to take the card, glancing at it before handing it back. "Funny," he said. "Don't remember seeing you around before." "Maybe you weren't looking," Samuel said evenly. A pause. Too long. The kind that breathes wrong. Sutter's hand dropped to the holster at his waist. Atlas let out a low, almost imperceptible growl. "Control your dog," Brenner snapped. "He is controlled," Samuel said firmly. "Not good enough," Sutter barked, stepping out of the car. Samuel's body tensed. His hand dropped slightly, palm open, a silent command for Atlas to stay. "Officers," he said calmly, "there's no threat here." But they weren't listening. Not to his voice, not to his tone, not to his record or his service or the neatly stitched flag on his porch. They only saw the silhouette of a black man they didn't recognize, standing his ground. And in that instant, what had been a quiet walk, a simple moment of peace, became something else entirely. Suspicion replaced sunlight. Tension eclipsed tranquility. And peace, earned, longed for, needed, was gone. In its place, something far older, far heavier. The kind of threat Samuel had trained his whole life to confront, but never thought he'd face just 4 blocks from home. Officer Kyle Brenner didn't see himself as the problem. He saw himself as the protector. The last real man left on a force filled with paperwork pushers and quota dodgers. 30 years in the department, 2 commendations, and a framed photo with the governor on his desk. Proof, at least to him, that he was doing things right. He patrolled like the streets belonged to him, his town, his rules, his justice. And he never questioned why people grew quiet when he stepped out of his cruiser or why body cams accidentally shut off during the most crucial moments. Power didn't need reflection. It just needed control. Dean Sutter was younger, 32, ex-military, dishonorably discharged for excessive force during an overseas raid that never made the news. He had that jittery energy of a man who felt more at home in chaos than calm. His file was thinner than Brenner's, but the pages that were there told a darker story. Unchecked aggression, unprovoked stops, physical intimidation. But Brenner liked him. Said he reminded him of himself before the world got soft. Together, they were the department's quiet hammer, efficient, feared, and almost always unaccountable. Over the past 5 years, they'd worked together like clockwork. Every suspicious vehicle, every out-of-place pedestrian, every shadow where a black or brown body moved freely became their justification for a stop. Brenner knew how to speak the language of law. Sutter knew how to press against the edge of legality without tipping it over. Dozens of complaints had come in, allegations of racial profiling, intimidation, excessive force, but they were dismissed, buried, labeled unsubstantiated by the internal affairs captain who used to be Brenner's partner. It was a closed loop, a protected circle, and within it, they thrived. That's why, when they first saw Samuel Redding walking with Atlas through Sycamore Lane, they didn't see a man. They saw an opportunity, a scenario they'd played out 100 times. Another check, another face they didn't recognize, another black man in a neighborhood where people mowed their lawns in polo shirts and waved at patrol cars without fear. From the moment Brenner spotted him, he clocked everything. 6'3", solid build, confident gait. That unreadable stillness that made people like him twitch. But it wasn't just Samuel's size. It was his calm. That deliberate pace. The way he looked at the cruiser without flinching. The lack of fear. It rattled Brenner. Because, in his experience, men who didn't flinch were men who didn't fold. And those were the most dangerous kind. Sutter leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "You see that guy?" "Yeah," Brenner muttered. "Never seen him before. Let's take a look." They didn't flip the lights on. That wasn't their style. Flashing lights came later. After the narrative had been shaped. After the situation had already turned. Instead, they coasted behind him, slow and deliberate. Watching. Waiting. When they pulled alongside him and rolled the window down, Brenner led with a fake smile. A compliment about the dog. A harmless tone. Samuel's measured response only deepened the chill in his stomach. No stammer. No wide-eyed deference. Just presence. That's what really bothered him. The man wasn't afraid. Sutter's tone sharpened when he asked for ID. Samuel questioned the reason. Not rudely, just directly. And when he finally complied, moving slowly and deliberately, it was clear. This man wasn't new to danger. He was trained. The way he stood, centered and unthreatening, yet clearly in control of the moment, it shifted the balance. Brenner felt it in his spine. When Samuel pointed out he lived 4 blocks down, that he had a flag hanging on his porch, Sutter's jaw clenched. He didn't like being corrected. He especially didn't like being corrected by someone who refused to shrink. That calm. It felt like mockery. So he stepped out of the cruiser, and that's when Atlas moved. Not a lunge, not a bark, just a step forward, one paw, protective, instinctive, silent. His body angled between Samuel and Sutter like a shield, his eyes locked on the stranger approaching with unfamiliar intent. "Control your damn dog," Sutter barked, hand snapping to the grip of his holstered weapon. "He is controlled," Samuel replied firmly, voice even. "Do not escalate this." But the line had already been crossed. Brenner stepped out now, too, both men flanking Samuel like wolves circling a threat. The air thickened. Atlas stood still but alert, muscles coiled like tension given form. Sutter's voice rose. "Not good enough!" "Officers," Samuel said, lowering his voice deliberately. "I've cooperated. You've seen my ID. There is no threat here. Then why's your dog acting like there is? Brenner said, smirking, taking a slow step forward. Because you are. Samuel tilted his head slightly. That unreadable look again. Calculation behind calm. He could feel it now, the moment tilting toward something irreversible. Every nerve in his body went tight. He knew this rhythm. He had felt it before in alleys laced with ambush, in bunkers before gunfire, in negotiations seconds before betrayal. He wasn't on a sidewalk anymore. He was on a battlefield. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse. He just moved an inch back, kept his hands visible, and whispered one word. Stay. Atlas obeyed, but his eyes stayed locked on Sutter. Then it happened. Sutter reached, not for the leash, not for a citation pad, but for his gun. It wasn't fully drawn, just a motion, a threat, a possibility waiting for permission to become reality. And that's when Atlas growled, deep, guttural, low enough to rattle the bones beneath the noise. Not aggressive, protective. Warning. Everything froze. Time fractured. Brenner's hand mirrored Sutter's in a heartbeat. Two guns halfway out of their holsters. Two officers feeling their control unravel. One man trying to de-escalate with only his voice. One dog holding back every instinct to protect with force. And that was the moment, the exact sliver of time, when peace truly died. Because this wasn't about Atlas anymore. Or Samuel. Or even a neighborhood watch call. This was about power. Samuel had answered questions, shown ID, complied. But he had refused to submit. And for men like Brenner and Sutter, that was the real threat. So they leaned in, not because they feared Samuel might hurt them, but because they needed him to look like he might. They needed an excuse. And somewhere in their twisted equation, a dog stepping forward became that excuse. Brenner gave a nod. Sutter drew. Samuel shouted. The shot rang out. Atlas fell. And the leash, the symbol of calm, of control, of connection, went slack in Samuel's hand. Peace, once fragile, was now shattered beyond recognition. The gunshot shattered everything. It didn't echo like it did in war. Tight stone walls and dirt roads could trap a sound, send it bouncing in all directions until it became something more than noise. No, this was different. Open sky, suburban stillness. The sound hung heavy in the air for just a second, like even the breeze forgot how to move. A flash of heat, the mechanical crack of gunpowder and metal, and then silence. Pure, blistering silence. Atlas dropped instantly. No growl, no bark, just a thud. A weight that hit the ground like a betrayal. Samuel didn't scream. He didn't lunge. For half a second, he just stood frozen, as if his brain couldn't process what his eyes had already seen. Atlas, his partner, his peace, his protector, lay on the concrete, one side of his fur soaked in red, twitching in slow, sick spasms. The leash slipped from Samuel's hand. His knees gave out. He dropped beside him without thinking, hands reaching, voice caught in his throat. "Stay with me," he whispered, voice cracking. "Stay, stay, boy." But Atlas wasn't responding. His eyes were wide, clouding, flickering in and out of focus. His breath came in short, frantic bursts, chest heaving, legs kicking like he was trying to run, but couldn't remember where to go. Samuel's fingers pressed against the wound. Warm blood surged between them. He knew it was a major artery. He knew there wasn't time. He also knew it was already too late. Then the shouting started. "Hands where we can see them! Get away from the dog! Now, hands up!" Samuel didn't move, not because he was resisting, because he couldn't. Because he wasn't in control of his body anymore. Because the man who'd survived explosions, ambushes, black site prisons, and dark corners of the world most people pretended didn't exist, had just watched his only source of peace bleed out on a sidewalk in a neighborhood he paid taxes to live in. "Step away!" Brenner bellowed. He didn't. He placed one hand gently on Atlas's head and whispered again, softer this time. "Good boy. I'm sorry." The first blow came hard and fast, a baton across the shoulder blades. Samuel collapsed forward, head slamming into the sidewalk. Then came the electric bite. A pulse of voltage cracked through his spine, stealing breath, control, thought. Muscles seized. Limbs jerked. His body screamed even if his mouth couldn't. He was on his stomach now, boots pressed against his arms, weight crushing down on his back, knees grinding into his ribs. He couldn't breathe. Hands wrenched behind him, metal cuffs biting into his wrists. Another shock. Then another. "For resisting!" Sutter barked, as if saying it made it true. "Dog was hostile," Brenner added, voice already rehearsing the report. Blood dripped from Samuel's nose. His cheek scraped raw against the concrete. His ears rang. His heart pounded. And yet the only thing he could focus on was the stillness beside him. Atlas wasn't moving anymore. No rise and fall of breath, no twitch of muscle. Gone. The world blurred. Somewhere in the distance, voices called for backup. A few neighbors had come outside, phones in hand, stunned into silence. A teenager across the street stood with his hands trembling around a camera, already filming. And still, the officers barked orders, pushed harder, acted like they were taking down a threat instead of covering a mistake. "Stay down! Don't move!" Samuel didn't move. Couldn't. Didn't want to. Because what was the point? His mind spiraled inward, past the pain, past the humiliation, past the cold fury rising like bile in his throat. He was back in Kandahar. He was back in Marja. He was back on missions where his job had been to protect, to see danger before it struck, to neutralize it, to outthink it, to keep others safe. But here, in the supposed safety of home, he had been powerless. They'd killed Atlas. They'd tasered him, and no one was going to stop them. Minutes passed like hours. The ambulance came, not for Atlas, just for protocol, to check vitals, clear the scene. A sergeant arrived. Brenner told his story. Sutter added his piece. The suspect was uncooperative. The dog growled. We feared for our safety. Samuel didn't speak. Didn't need to. His silence said more than anything they could lie about. Later, cuffed in the back of the cruiser, blood on his shirt, body aching, Samuel leaned his head against the window. The reflection staring back was not unfamiliar, but it wasn't him either. It was a version of himself he had buried long ago. The one who had learned how to disappear inside pain. The one who had lived through horrors and come back different. Not broken. Not weak. Just changed. At the precinct, the story continued. Paperwork shuffled. Body cams were malfunctioning. Again. Audio corrupted. Footage missing. But they didn't know about the doorbell camera across the street, or the phone in the hands of the teen who never stopped filming. The truth had slipped past their grasp. Samuel was charged with resisting arrest and obstruction, fingerprinted, booked, his face swollen, his ribs bruised, his wrists bleeding. He sat in the holding cell like he used to sit in briefing rooms before missions, still, straight-backed, every breath calculated. They let him go at 1:37 in the morning. No apology, no explanation. Just a silent escort out the back door with paperwork still warm from the printer. He walked home alone. 6 blocks. Blood dried on his temple, shirt torn. The air felt heavier than before. Every step felt like a negotiation with gravity. When he finally stepped through his front door, the house was so quiet it hurt. Not peaceful, not still. Just empty. The bowl was still on the floor. The leash still on the hook. Atlas's toys still scattered in the corner of the living room like he'd just gone outside for a moment. But he wasn't coming back. Samuel dropped to his knees in the dark, hands pressed to the floor, body shaking in silence. Not sobbing, not screaming, just shaking. Like a man who had used up all his language, all his anger, all his fight. He had survived IEDs, insurgents, friendly fire, and secret wars in places maps refused to name. But here, in the heart of American suburbia, at 5:50 in the evening, on a quiet street lined with picket fences and porch lights, he had watched peace die. And the worst part? He wasn't even surprised. The days that followed felt unreal. Not dreamlike. There was no softness, no escape, no drifting from the edges of pain, but unreal in the sense that time lost shape. Morning slid into night without notice. Coffee sat cold in the pot. Samuel moved through his home like a ghost. Atlas's absence was a wound that didn't clot. The leash still hung by the door. The chew toy still waited under the coffee table. The food bowl remained full, untouched. But the house was empty now. Not of furniture, of meaning. He filed the complaint less than 48 hours after the incident. The paperwork was dense. Forms upon forms, witness statements, medical reports, photos of bruises. He attached the footage, the grainy video from the teenager across the street, and the high-resolution clip from the neighbor's doorbell camera. It showed the confrontation. It showed Atlas. It showed the leash, the commands, the non-aggression. It showed everything. He submitted it all to Internal Affairs. He delivered a copy to the precinct. He handed another to the Civilian Review Board. Then he waited. 3 days. Nothing. 5. A generic email. Your complaint is being reviewed. A week later, another. Due to officer safety concerns, public statements cannot be made at this time. He called the mayor's office. No answer. Left messages. No return. Reached out to 2 city council members. Both offered sympathetic tones, but no commitment. These things take time. Let the process work. Don't jeopardize the integrity of the investigation. They called him Sir. They called him Veteran. But what they meant was problem. The press inquiries went the same way. One reporter from the Tribune responded, briefly, said he'd heard about the incident, but didn't want to run a story without confirmed facts. When Samuel asked what confirmation looked like, the man stammered, official statements, press clearance. The officers, still on duty, still in the neighborhood, still driving past his house. On the 10th day, he saw Brenner cruise past his front yard at 3 in the afternoon. Slow, windows down. The kind of patrol that wasn't about protection, it was about presence, about reminder. Samuel stood behind the curtains and watched the car crawl past like a snake through weeds. He felt something settle inside him then. Not fear, not even rage. It was colder than that. A stillness that didn't tremble. He saw the truth. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was designed to. Every door he knocked on was polished brass with deadbolts behind it. Every complaint, a file dragged into a forgotten inbox. Every promise of accountability, just another script in a theater with no lights. They didn't forget about men like him. They ignored them, strategically, silently, with smiling teeth and quiet pens. The word resisting was still on his arrest record. The charge hadn't been dropped, just deferred. Atlas's name wasn't in any official report, so he stopped waiting and started watching. Samuel had spent 2 decades gathering intel in places where the rules were written in blood. He knew how to find patterns, how to build timelines, how to sit in silence until the world gave up its secrets. If they wouldn't see him as a citizen, maybe they'd see him as something else. something closer to what he used to be. It began small. He mapped out Brenner and Sutter's shifts using online scanner traffic, a public app, and routine observation. He charted when they clocked in, where they liked to idle, who they harassed, who they avoided. He noticed the repetition: morning patrols near the high school, late-night passes through low-income housing, long breaks behind the strip mall just off Route 17. He bought a new dashcam with night vision. He set up a mounted lens on his bedroom window facing the street. He walked the neighborhood during off hours, striking quiet conversations with the overlooked: the mail carrier, the janitor at the gas station, the woman who walked her 3 kids to school rain or shine. He asked questions, not directly, just gently enough to get stories. And the stories came. One man had been pulled over twice in the same week for failure to signal, both times by Sutter. A teenage girl had seen her older brother thrown against a cruiser because Brenner didn't like his hoodie. A mother whispered through tears that her son had been beaten during a stop, and then told, "There's no camera. Who do you think they'll believe?" Samuel wrote it all down, cataloged it, labeled it. He built a case, not for the courts, but for the truth. Every statement, every timestamp, every incident that had disappeared under pending review. He was building a map of systemic rot, one block at a time. He began watching their body cam logs, cross-referencing when cameras malfunctioned against civilian footage. The patterns were clear: convenient corruption, calculated erasure. He didn't go back to the precinct. He didn't return the calls from the city's conciliatory outreach team, who now wanted to hear his concerns. He didn't want their apologies. He wanted exposure. At night, he sat at his kitchen table under the same overhead light, spreading documents across the surface like old war maps. His laptop hummed softly beside him, filled with photos, reports, video clips, audio files, and metadata. All organized, all traceable, all damning. And sometimes, when the silence grew too heavy, he'd place his hand on the leash still hanging by the door. Atlas had been the only thing keeping him rooted, the only thing keeping him from drifting too far into what he used to be. Now that anchor was gone, and in its place was something sharper, something dangerous. Not revenge, resolution. The system had made a mistake. It tried to bury a man trained to see beneath the surface, to dig where others wouldn't, to hold still when others ran. A man who understood how power moved when no one was watching. But Samuel Redding was watching now, and he had stopped asking permission. It began with a name, not Brenner's, not Sutter's. Those names were already etched into Samuel's bones, names that burned each time he passed Atlas's leash on the wall, each time he caught his own reflection and didn't recognize the stillness in his eyes. No, the name that opened the first door was smaller, unremarkable on paper. A clerk at the courthouse. Someone who used to pass Samuel coffee in a safe house overseas before either of them had titles. Now she processed internal police records in a county office that claimed transparency while perfecting secrecy. He sent one message: "I'm not looking to destroy anyone, I just want the truth. Can you help me?" Her response came 12 hours later. "Meet me at the Green Line parking structure, 3rd level, Tuesday, after 7. And just like that, the clock started ticking. Samuel had learned to wait in shadows. Foreign cities, rooftop perches, blind corners. He knew how to breathe slowly enough that his presence dissolved into the background. Surveillance wasn't just skill, it was posture, rhythm, stillness. He fell back into it like muscle memory. That Tuesday night, he waited in a car that didn't look like his, wearing a coat that didn't fit right, with a satchel that carried only a pen, a pad, and a secure drive. She arrived 10 minutes late, glancing over her shoulder 3 times before getting in the passenger seat. Her name was Lena. "They keep everything off-site now," she whispered, not meeting his eyes. Encrypted servers. No direct access unless you're flagged internal. But sometimes, things get printed before they're deleted. She handed him a folder. Thin, stapled. Inside were 5 incident reports, all involving Brenner or Sutter, all marked resolved or unfounded. But the language was identical, word for word. Same phrasing, same misspellings, same justifications. Copy-pasted, Lena said. Whoever's protecting them doesn't even try to hide it anymore. Samuel looked at the names. Teenage boys, single mothers, veterans, immigrants. A dozen faces behind redacted lines. Lena continued, "There's more, but I can't send it. Not digitally. Too risky." Samuel nodded. He didn't ask for more. She'd already given him what he needed. A crack, just wide enough to widen. He went home and didn't sleep. Instead, he stood at the table with a pen in his hand, redrawing maps from memory, surveillance plans, extraction routes, visual fields. His years in Navy intelligence had taught him to move in systems, not steps. So he didn't just follow Brenner and Sutter. He studied them like a language. Every shift change, every alley they lingered in too long, every business where cameras conveniently faced the wrong way, every convenience store clerk too afraid to speak when they walked through the door. He gathered footage. Not just his own, he hacked together a grid of private security feeds, ring cameras, gas station cams. Some had no sound. Others were blurry. But truth didn't need clarity to be revealed. He watched them plant doubt in the eyes of civilians. The smug tilt of Brenner's mouth when he forced someone to the curb. The cold flicker in Sutter's eyes before he stepped too close, spoke too loud, made the other person flinch. Samuel cataloged it all. But even that wasn't enough. He needed the internal rot. So he reached out again, this time to Donovan. Donovan Mathers had once been a field asset in West Africa. But after retirement, he became something else. An archivist. Deep connections. Deeper systems. Now he ran a private intel firm in D.C. Discreet. Untraceable. Well-funded. Samuel sent a message with 3 words. Still watching them. Donovan called back at 3:40 in the morning. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice rough but alert. "I need everything on the 8th precinct," Samuel said. "Brenner, Sutter, their internal handler. Who's protecting them? Who's redacting reports?" Donovan didn't ask why. He just sighed. "Give me 48 hours." What came back was staggering. A sealed report from 4 years prior, Brenner accused of breaking a suspect's jaw during a stop. Witness testimonies that mysteriously vanished. Medical records that contradicted police narratives. An IA officer who had been reassigned the day after filing her dissenting review. And Sutter. 6 use-of-force complaints in under 3 years, none resulting in disciplinary action. The signatures of clearance were always the same name. Lieutenant Paul Grayson, a man with a clean public face, a politician's smile, and a private history full of closed-door favors. Samuel sat in his living room surrounded by documents, the floor like a battlefield of paper and ink. He wasn't chasing vengeance anymore. He wasn't even angry. He was focused, because now he saw the shape of it, the architecture of impunity. This wasn't about 2 bad cops. It was about an entire structure designed to protect them. Their cruelty wasn't a glitch. It was policy, enforced through silence, sustained through paperwork, justified by fear. But fear worked both ways. So Samuel began to assemble a weapon, not one of bullets or fists, but of undeniable truth. He recorded himself breaking down each incident file by file. Voice calm, hands steady, overlaying timelines, showing receipts, dates, quotes, patterns. He narrated the story no one had dared to write. Here is Brenner on patrol at 6:14 p.m. He claims the suspect lunged, But here's a video from a second angle. The man never moved. Here is Sutter's report. Says the suspect was aggressive, but this witness, unrelated, says otherwise. Her statement was never logged. He layered testimony after testimony. Audio, visuals, medical files, legal contradictions, coerced confessions. With each thread pulled, the image became clearer. This wasn't justice. This was control. And then came the final piece, a leaked audio file, fuzzy but legible, from a backroom meeting between Grayson and two unnamed officers. Samuel didn't know who recorded it. Maybe Lena. Maybe someone else watching from the inside. But the voice was unmistakable. If this goes public, we bury it. You got that? He's nobody. A dog walker with a record of war trauma. He's easy to discredit. If he keeps pushing, make him disappear. Samuel paused the tape and stared at the screen. It didn't scare him. It confirmed everything. They didn't just want to silence him. They needed to. Because in a world built on shadows, exposure is the only threat that matters. And now the watchman was awake. The moment had to feel natural. Accidental even. Too clean, and it would reek of entrapment. Too messy, and it would fall apart. Samuel knew better than to rely on chance. Operations like this didn't leave room for coincidence. He needed control of the location, of the angle, of the sound, of himself. Especially himself. One raised voice, one clenched fist, and the whole truth could collapse under the weight of a single bad frame. He didn't need to win the moment. He needed to reveal it. So he built the trap with precision. It started with routine. For 3 weeks, Samuel walked a different path. Not the one where Atlas used to roam beside him. That pain was still too fresh, too heavy. Instead, he traced a route 2 blocks over, past a liquor store where Brenner liked to park his cruiser in the evenings, engine idling, waiting for someone to look suspicious. Samuel made sure to pass that spot. Same time, same clothes, same deliberate calm. It took 4 days for Brenner to bite. The cruiser door slammed open behind him. Samuel didn't turn around. He just stopped, slowly, as if the sound of boots against pavement was nothing more than a curious breeze. "Well, well," Brenner's voice called, smirking through every syllable. "Look who decided to take a walk." Samuel turned, camera already rolling from the button stitched into his jacket. High definition, wide angle, low light. Hidden mic on his collar. "Officer Brenner," he said, voice flat but not hostile. "Something I can help you with?" "You're back to walking the streets like you own the place," Brenner sneered, stepping closer. "No leash this time. Guess you're finally on your own." The jab cut, but Samuel didn't flinch. "Is there a legal issue here?" he asked, calm as glass. "Or is this a personal grudge?" Brenner laughed, a low, ugly sound. "Grudge? No. You just don't know when to quit." Another step. He was too close now, less than a foot. Eyes narrowed, hand brushing the edge of his holster like a nervous tick. "Tell me something," Samuel said softly, camera catching every twitch of muscle. "Did you even write the report? Or did someone higher up hand you the script?" Brenner's face shifted, just for a second. Not fear, not guilt, recognition. He knew. "You think people care what a washed-up vet says?" he spat. "You think you're gonna win some sympathy parade because your mutt jumped at the wrong time?" Still, Samuel didn't move. "I think," he said carefully, "people will care once they see what you really are." Brenner scoffed. "What I am? A man who mistook a badge for permission." There was a pause. 1 second. 2. The kind of silence that makes the air itself lean forward. Then Brenner snapped. "Don't test me, Redding. I'll make sure you never walk these streets again." Samuel tilted his head. "That sounds like a threat." "It's a promise." Perfect. He didn't need anything else. The footage was golden. The angles, the lighting, the proximity. Every word caught crystal clear. No edits needed. Just context. Just contrast. Samuel stepped back, slowly. "Have a good night, officer," and walked away. He uploaded the video that night. No name attached, no credits. Just a caption. "This is who patrols your neighborhood." Then he hit send to 3 local news stations, 7 activists, 2 civil rights attorneys, and a national journalist who had once covered war crimes overseas. He didn't wait for the story to break, because he wasn't finished. The next night, he did the same thing, only this time with Sutter. That setup was different. Sutter was more paranoid, less composed. He responded best to agitation, not challenge. So Samuel staged it outside the bar, where Sutter often drank alone after shifts, a dive that stank of stale beer and shame. Samuel leaned against a street lamp just across from the door, hands visible, posture open. Waiting. Sutter came out at 9:23, wobbly, loose-jawed, dangerous. "Redding," he said, voice slurred but sharp. "You following me now?" "No," Samuel replied. "Just watching." "Looking for another lawsuit?" "No, just the truth." Sutter laughed and stumbled forward, face flushed with alcohol and ego. "You think any of this matters? You think anyone's going to take your word over mine?" "No," Samuel said evenly. "That's why I brought a camera." Sutter froze. His eyes darted. He stepped back, but too late. "Smile," Samuel said. The camera was rolling the whole time. From the moment Sutter stepped out the door to the moment he leaned in too close and whispered, "You don't scare me. Men like you, you're not built for real war." Samuel just nodded. "Neither are you." That was it. No violence, no shouts, just words. But it was enough. 2 confrontations, 2 recordings, 1 week apart. He compiled both videos with a clean title screen. Public servants, private threats. Then he paired them with the documents, the sealed reports, the redacted testimonies, the medical files Lena had helped uncover, the audio clip from Lieutenant Grayson, and a timeline showing years of suppressed complaints. He packaged it like a dossier, anonymous, untraceable. He dropped it into the inbox of every major outlet, from The Atlantic to Vice to a few investigative YouTubers with millions of followers. It spread like fire. By the second day, the footage had over 2 million views. By the third, the mayor's office released a statement expressing concern. By the fourth, Brenner and Sutter were placed on administrative leave. But the damage was already done. Samuel watched it all unfold from the quiet of his living room, curtains drawn, laptop glowing in the dark. No interviews, no comments, no tweets, just silence. He didn't need the spotlight. He just needed the truth to burn through the mask. And now, for the first time in a long time, the world was watching them. Not him, them. They didn't respond right away. For the first 36 hours after the footage broke, the city's official channels were eerily quiet. No press release, no statement, not even a social media post. But inside the walls of the 8th Precinct, and even higher up in City Hall, the panic was already bubbling into full-fledged crisis mode. The footage couldn't be dismissed. It was too clean, too damning. 2 officers, unprovoked, revealing exactly who they were. And worst of all, they had no idea who had filmed it. The department's first move came late. Too late to control the narrative. It was a brief, nervous press conference held on the courthouse steps. The police chief, sweating under a too-tight collar, read from a carefully worded statement that had clearly gone through a dozen rounds of edits. "We are aware of the footage circulating on social media. Officers Brenner and Sutter have been placed on administrative leave pending internal review. The department is committed to transparency and accountability." But the questions from reporters came fast and sharp. Why weren't prior complaints against these officers acted upon? Is it true body cam footage has gone missing in related incidents? What do you say to the community members who have been accusing these same officers for years?" The chief stumbled, stammered, then walked off without answering. That clip made it to national news. By day 4, the department changed strategies. They stopped apologizing and started attacking. Suddenly, anonymous sources were leaking to local papers. One article described Samuel as a troubled veteran with a history of paranoia. Another hinted at past anger issues from his military file. Never mind that he had retired with honors. They painted a portrait of a man unraveling, suggesting that the viral footage was an act of manipulation, that it had been selectively edited. But it didn't work, because for every whisper campaign, Samuel had receipts. He didn't speak publicly, but his allies did. Civil rights attorneys from 2 major firms stepped forward, citing a pattern of misconduct that spanned nearly a decade. The original reports, previously sealed, conveniently misfiled, or mysteriously redacted, began to re-emerge, leaked one by one, until the illusion of isolated incidents fell apart entirely. And then the footage surfaced. Not just his footage, not just the 2 confrontations, but doorbell cam videos, witness cell phone clips, a video from a convenience store camera showing Sutter slamming a teenager against a wall for loitering. Another of Brenner shoving a handcuffed man into the side of his cruiser. And perhaps most damning, a shaky phone recording of Lieutenant Paul Grayson talking in a parking lot about cleaning up any fallout. The city was hemorrhaging public trust. Protests sprang up outside the precinct. Signs bearing Atlas's name. Posters with Samuel's face beside the words, "You don't silence the truth." On the 7th day, the district attorney's office could no longer avoid the wave. DA Catherine Niles held her own press conference, calm, clear-eyed, and, unlike the police chief, prepared. "An independent investigation has been opened," she announced. "In coordination with the Attorney General's office, we will be reviewing all conduct related to Officers Brenner and Sutter, as well as the integrity of internal review processes over the past 10 years. A pause. Then she added, "And yes, Mr. Samuel Redding will be called to testify." That was the moment the system began to turn on itself. Grayson retired 2 days later. Sutter was arrested that Friday, booked quietly at dawn. Brenner tried to run. But when he realized federal investigators were watching his house, his phone, and even his bank account, he turned himself in with a lawyer who wouldn't make it through the weekend without recusing himself. And Samuel? He stayed silent. He didn't hold a press conference. He didn't sit down for interviews. He declined every media request, ignored every podcast invite. Instead, he prepared. The grand jury subpoena arrived on a Tuesday morning. Simple envelope. No fanfare. But the weight behind it was unmistakable. Inside, the living room still bore the quiet signs of war. His laptop still open. Files still organized. Atlas's collar still on the mantel. He held the envelope in one hand and the collar in the other for a long time, before setting them both down. Testifying wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice in the way people imagined it. Courtroom drama and victorious applause. It was about record, about making sure that the truth didn't disappear behind another closed door. When Samuel entered the courthouse the following week, he wore a gray suit, simple and pressed. No medals, no symbols, just a man prepared to speak the truth. Inside the grand jury chamber, the air was heavy with anticipation. Reporters weren't allowed, but rumors swirled fast and wild in the hallways. The room was filled with prosecutors, clerks, jurors, whose eyes tracked Samuel like he was walking with fire in his hands. He took the stand without a hint of hesitation, swore in, sat straight, and spoke. He described the walk that evening, the leash in his hand, the warmth of the sun on his skin. He spoke of Atlas, not as a pet, but as a partner. of discipline, of peace, of the moment it all unraveled. He told them about the taser, the cuffs, the charge of resisting when he hadn't even raised his voice. Then he told them what came next. The silence, the dismissals, the red tape, the cameras that malfunctioned, the false reports, the names, the patterns. When asked how he got the footage, how he found the documents, how he coordinated leaks without exposing himself, he answered plainly, "I did what I was trained to do. I gathered intelligence, I followed truth. No drama, no fire, just fact." The jurors didn't move much, but they didn't need to. The truth had already landed like a thunderclap in a room that had heard too many lies. When Samuel stepped out of the courthouse 3 hours later, a crowd had gathered, silent, respectful, waiting. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He just walked. And for the first time since Atlas had died, he didn't feel alone. He felt seen. The courthouse doors creaked like they knew what was coming. Day one of the trial drew a crowd that stretched around the block. News vans parked bumper to bumper, microphones pointed at the entrance like weapons, and protesters pressed against the barricades with signs that read, "Justice for Atlas," "We believe Samuel," and "Expose them all." What had started as one man's silent resistance had become a movement. But inside the courtroom, silence reigned. Heavy, intentional. Like the air itself knew it was standing witness to history. Samuel sat in the second row of the courtroom gallery on that first day, dressed in black, hands folded. Not clenched, not shaking, just steady. Next to him sat Lena, the courthouse clerk who had given him the first leak, her gaze focused forward, unreadable. Across the aisle sat 2 lawyers from the civil rights group that had picked up his case, flipping through files like soldiers checking ammunition before battle. And then, of course, there were Brenner and Sutter. They looked smaller now. Not physically, but in presence. No badge, no uniform, just 2 men in off-the-rack suits who kept avoiding eye contact with the gallery. Sutter fidgeted constantly, chewing the inside of his cheek, tapping his knee. Brenner tried to keep his smirk, but it cracked under the weight of the cameras. Because everyone was watching now. Not just the city. The country. The trial had become more than an indictment of 2 officers. It was an autopsy of an entire system. The prosecution opened with brutal clarity. They played the footage, first Samuel's, then the doorbell cam, then the liquor store parking lot clip. The jury watched in silence as Brenner's voice rang through the courtroom like a ghost. "You think anyone's gonna take your word over mine?" Followed by Sutter's drunken sneer, "You're not built for real war." The prosecution let the silence do most of the talking. Then they began calling witnesses, neighbors who had seen the aftermath, the teenager who had filmed part of the arrest, the nurse who treated Samuel's injuries. They called Lena, who testified about the falsified reports and redacted files. They called an internal affairs officer who had quit in protest years earlier, and a data analyst who demonstrated how body cams failed in 47% of Brenner and Sutter's stops, compared to the city average of 7%. The defense tried to pivot, of course, claimed the officers were under pressure, that the situation had escalated unpredictably, that the dog had lunged. They leaned on the trope of the dangerous veteran, trying to paint Samuel as volatile, unstable, difficult to control. But the footage, cold, clear, unblinking, contradicted every word. Then on day 4, Samuel took the stand. There was no change in his posture, no shift in demeanor. He walked to the witness box like he was walking into another room in his home. Calm, grounded, ready. The prosecution began gently. "Mr. Redding, can you walk us through what happened on the evening of May 10th? Samuel looked forward, not at the jury, not at the lawyers, but somewhere just beyond the wall, like he was speaking to someone not in the room. "I was walking Atlas," he said. "He was a rescue. We did the same route every evening. It was quiet, safe. I'd just gotten back from a long trip. That walk was supposed to be our moment of peace." He paused. They approached. 2 officers. No lights, no sirens. Just suspicion. I gave them my ID. I told them I lived 4 blocks away. I told them where. They didn't care. He described the moment Brenner's voice changed. The way Sutter reached for his gun. The way Atlas stepped forward. Not in aggression, but protection. "They killed him for moving," Samuel said, voice steady. "He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He just stepped between me and danger." There was no anger in his tone, no rage, just fact. And that was what made it devastating. The prosecutor asked if he resisted. "No," Samuel answered. "I didn't yell. I didn't flinch. I did what I was trained to do in war zones. Breathe, stay still, stay alive." When they asked him about the aftermath, his voice dropped just slightly. "I sat in a holding cell while they were writing fiction," he said. "And when I got home, all I had left was a leash and blood on my shirt." The courtroom was so still that every breath felt like thunder. Then came the cross-examination. The defense attorney circled like a man grasping at shadows. "You're an intelligence operative, correct?" "Retired," Samuel replied. "You've conducted surveillance before. Counterintelligence, psychological warfare." "Yes. So is it fair to say you know how to manipulate a narrative?" Samuel didn't blink. "No, it's fair to say I know how to document one." The jury never took their eyes off him. By the time Samuel stepped down, the outcome felt inevitable. But the system still needed to make it official. 2 more days of arguments, then 12 hours of deliberation. The jury returned in the early evening on day 7. Brenner, guilty on all counts. Sutter, guilty on all counts. The courtroom didn't erupt, it exhaled. Outside, the crowd lit up. Applause, tears, chants. "Say his name," someone yelled. "Atlas," came the response. It wasn't just for Samuel anymore. It was for every person whose story had been buried under red tape, silenced by bureaucracy, ignored by systems designed to protect the powerful. It was for the mothers who were told their sons had resisted, for the students labeled threats, for the names on files stamped closed and unfounded. The city couldn't hide anymore, and neither could the nation. That night, protesters marched not just in Samuel's city, but in others across the country. Screens flickered with his testimony. Hashtags trended. Atlas's face, stoic and loyal, appeared on murals and banners. Not just a dog, a symbol. And Samuel! He didn't celebrate. He sat in his living room, lights dimmed, collar still on the mantel. He turned off the television. He didn't need to hear what the anchors were saying. He already knew. The reckoning had arrived, and it had spoken in the voice of a man who refused to stay silent. It had been 5 months since the verdict. The city had changed, not in the ways that newspapers measured, but in the ways that lived in people's eyes. Patrol cars now rolled a little slower. Officers kept their distance when they approached a front porch. Kids on bikes waved without flinching. It wasn't peace, not really, but it was something quieter, something cautious. A shift, a reckoning that had left a scar too public to hide. And Samuel? He didn't go back to his old life. He didn't move away either. He stayed, close enough to watch, far enough to breathe. The reporters had stopped calling. The court hearings had ended. Civil suits were in motion, the department reshuffling leadership in a panic dressed as reform. But Samuel didn't attend the follow-ups, didn't sit in any more galleries, or shake the hands of politicians who were suddenly fluent in justice. He had done what he came to do. Now, he just wanted to say goodbye. It was late afternoon when he arrived. The air was crisp. the sun low but bright enough to throw long shadows across the grass. The cemetery sat just outside the city, nestled between a stand of sugar maples and a narrow country road. No iron gate, no chapel. Just open land, simple stones, and a kind of silence that didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. Samuel parked on the far end and walked the rest of the way, each step slow, deliberate. He didn't wear black this time, just a gray coat, worn at the edges, and a scarf Atlas used to chew when he was still a pup. In his hand, a single branch of rosemary. No bouquet, no ribbon, just something real, something grounded. He stopped at the small headstone, smooth, clean, simple. Atlas, loyal, brave, loved. There were no dates, no flourishes, just the truth. Samuel stood there for a while without speaking. The wind stirred the grass, but didn't touch him. Time felt slower here, like the earth knew how to hold grief without rushing it along. Finally he crouched, brushing a few stray leaves from the edge of the stone. He placed the rosemary gently at its base. "Hey, boy," he said, the words barely more than a breath. "Took me a while to come back." His hand ran along the edge of the stone, his fingers pausing in the carved groove of Atlas's name. "They still say your name, you know. You're on murals now. Kids ask who you were." He let a smile flicker across his face. Small, soft. "I tell them you were the quiet kind of strong, like the wind before a storm, like home." He sat down beside the grave, one knee bent, the other folded under him, coat brushing against the dirt. His voice dropped lower, into something more private. "I haven't forgiven them," he said, "and I don't know if I ever will. Not just for what they did to you, but for what they made me remember." His gaze drifted to the trees, then back to the stone. "I'd buried a lot of things before that day. Things I saw, things I did. But what happened to you?" He paused. "That wasn't war. That was here. That was supposed to be safe." The wind shifted again, softer now, like it was listening. "I didn't fight back because of what they did to me. I fought back because they expected me not to." He exhaled slowly. "They thought silence meant submission. But you know better. You always knew." For a long moment, he said nothing, just sat there, letting the quiet wrap around him, letting the weight of what had been done settle in a place that didn't crush him anymore. It just existed. The sky overhead was fading into deeper blue, tinged with orange near the horizon. A line of geese passed overhead, their cries echoing faintly as they moved east. Samuel looked down at the leash coiled in his hand. "I kept it," he said. "Can't let it go. I still reach for it some mornings, thinking you'll be waiting by the door." His jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed clear. "I miss you. More than I can say, but I finished it." He stood slowly, brushing the dirt from his coat, adjusting the scarf. He didn't rush, didn't turn away right away. He looked down one more time. "It wasn't just for you," he said, "but it started there, and that's what matters." His boots pressed softly into the grass as he stepped back. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't have to. Some bonds don't break. They just go quiet for a while. He walked back to the road under a sky that was slowly dimming, each star starting to blink through the canopy of dusk. When he reached the car, he paused, turned one last time to look across the field. Somewhere behind him, cities were still shouting. Protests still marched. Systems still resisted. But here, in this one small patch of earth, a kind of peace had settled. Not justice, not forgiveness, but peace. The quiet kind. The kind you carve out when you refuse to be erased. He slid into the driver's seat, rested his hand on the wheel, and let the silence stretch just a little longer before he turned the key. No medals had been given, No parade had been held, but something had shifted. A truth had been spoken so loud it cracked stone, and a city would never forget the name Atlas, nor the man who made sure silence would never speak louder than justice again. This story wasn't just about Samuel Redding or the death of his loyal dog, Atlas. It was about us, about what kind of country we're living in, and what kind of country we're willing to become. In just one evening, on one sidewalk, a 45-year-old black veteran who had served with honor was treated like a threat in his own neighborhood. He didn't fight back with fists. He didn't seek revenge. He stood his ground with truth. He exposed a system that too often silences the innocent and shields the guilty. And in doing so, he reminded all of us that silence is not safety. It's complicity. As American citizens, we can no longer afford to look away. If justice is something we truly believe in, then accountability must start at the street level, where our neighbors walk, where our children play, where voices have too long gone unheard. We must demand better. We must protect the vulnerable, question those in power, and remember that real change doesn't come from rage alone. It comes from discipline, from clarity, and from the courage to speak when it's easier to stay quiet. Samuel's story is not an exception. It's a warning, but it's also a blueprint. Because what he did, gathering evidence, exposing lies, forcing a city to confront the truth, worked. Not with violence, with vigilance. If this story moved you, don't scroll past it. Take a moment right now to act. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that matter. Like this video to amplify its reach. Share it with your family, your friends, your community, because truth only spreads when we carry it forward. Whether it reaches 5 people or 5 million, you make that happen. Let this be more than content. Let it be momentum. Because justice doesn't happen in courtrooms alone. It happens in the hearts of people who refuse to look away. Starting now. Starting with us.